Hello, and welcome to My Counselor Live. My name is Brittany East, and if you have ever wondered why your body reacts the way it has in a traumatic event, then you'll definitely want to tune into today's talk. Joining me today is one of our clinicians, Emily Hurst. I'm so excited to sit down with her. She's joining us from Denver, and she's really excited to share her heart for helping people think about and wondering, normalizing what they're going through during trauma. Emily, before we jump into your article, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself so the viewers can get to know you more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a clinician with MCO. I'm located in our Denver, Colorado office. I actually just moved to Denver from Missouri. I just decided for a change of scenery, just wanted to move. So I moved here. But originally from the Seattle, Washington area, but was born and raised overseas actually. So just was a missionary's kid and then moved back to the United States. Really passionate about counseling and working with people in ministry, couples and individuals. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I'm excited. Yeah, that's like what a rich background, I'm sure, to see such a meet a wide variety of people, learn to interact with that, and even your moves. I totally understand. Colorado scenery is incredible. So totally get it. Well, let's just jump into your article because it actually brought up new things that I hadn't heard of before, and I'm sure most of our audience hadn't even heard of before. So your article is titled Fight, Flight, and Freeze, How We Respond to a Traumatic Event. So what inspired you to even write this article?
Yeah, so I just meet with so many of my trauma clients and I just hear them say statements like, why didn't I fight back? Or why didn't I run away? Or you grow up hearing people say things like, I'm a fighter, I'm a flight, I fight, I run. And I just started really conceptualizing how there's a huge part of this system and just automatic response that's happening in our body that's being missed and not communicated about.
Yeah.
There's this huge conception that it's like a choice. And that's what I was hearing in my clients was shame because I have a choice in it and I didn't choose the right one. Essentially, I let it happen to me, which is such a false statement. It's inaccurate and it cultivates and breeds shame in us. Yeah. So I just was really passionate about writing this article to kind of start breaking down that shame and bringing awareness to the fact that, it's fight or flight is what we hear, but then there's freeze. It's a whole nother one, and how that kind of plays out as well.
Yeah. So when you were writing this article, was it just to people who had experienced trauma, or was it a broader audience that you were envisioning?
It's for everyone. It's to help the people who have experienced trauma and they're questioning, why did I respond this way? It's for the people who know others who have experienced trauma and they're trying to help them through that. And it's just for the general public and understanding how we address, any threat, because it doesn't even have to be trauma. Anything that we perceive as a threat to ourselves, our body automatically activates this system within us.
Okay.
And so it's just helpful for everyone to kind of know and be able to conceptualize this kind of system in our body and to help them understand and break down shame within themselves and help them partner with somebody who is going through it as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it is true because you can't, because with someone who's experienced trauma, you want to be able to understand everything that happened to it, but someone, maybe you're watching someone go through it, understanding what happened can also help you to maybe even have more grace or understanding going through it. So I really appreciate your heart for that. So what exactly is the difference then between fighting, the flight, and then the freeze? Because the freeze is new to me.
Yeah, the freeze is new to a lot of people. They don't know that that's even one of the options. But it's pretty much exactly how it sounds like. So when our body perceives this threat, it activates our automatic nervous system. So I think that's the key word too, is automatic. There's no decision in this process, right? It happens on an automatic subconscious level in a very quick amount of time. So fighting, you fight, you kick, you scream, you punch. That might be what's happening in the moment. If you're triggered later on and your system is activated, you might experience rage, anger, clenching of fists, a desire to kick or punch or to scream. With flight, it's that nervous energy. You might feel restless, I want to run away. I want to get away. You might actually be able to run away if there's a traumatic event happening. Let me run. If you're in an argument with someone, because our fight or flight can get activated in arguments even. It might be that experience. Let me withdraw. Let me run away. Let me escape. So you might experience anxiety. You might experience an increased heart rate, breathing faster, that nervous energy, those restless legs, that just kind of energy you get within you that's like, let me escape this situation. And then with freezing, so that's this new one, right, that we're talking about. And it's exactly as it sounds, like you freeze. Another word that they use for it is tonic immobility.
Okay.
So in an actual traumatic situation, you might, like, your body might literally just shut down.
Wow.
And it's a way to protect you, right? So your mind almost might even detach from like the physical experiences to like keep you from the pain as much as possible. And then you might experience like numbness, a feeling like I can't move. You might notice your heart rate either increasing or decreasing. You might feel detached. But it's just that sense of like, I can't escape, so let me just shut down in this moment.
So do you think like people have always kind of had that freeze response, or is that something maybe newer, like within our like generation? Or because I mean, I definitely feel like, because like as you're describing, I'm like, wow, I do think I'm more of a freezer actually than even fight or flight. And I feel like I've always kind of, like you said, just been that way. Like, I don't know, my body just seems to like think that's the best way to handle it. Like, is this something that's always been around and we're just now discovering it, or they just used to kind of classify it under something else?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's always been around. It's not a new thing. Even if you like look at, so often in culture, like we look at animals too to see like what's going on. And so if you even see like when a deer or something feels threatened, it almost like freezes.
True.
Right? So that's us, like we freeze. And so I think it's been around for a really long time. We just haven't studied that response as much. We've really just been looking at fight or flight. And so now that we're looking more at trauma, and trauma is getting more research and recognition, we're just noticing that there are more than two ways to respond, and our body is responding in more than just fighting or flighting.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And then I know in your article, and even now, you talked about like people who experience, like they tend to experience like anger and the shame towards themselves about how they responded. Like I should have like there's a right way to respond to trauma. Like, why do you think that is, and how can someone begin to heal then from like all that anger and shame?
Yeah, so the most common, like I guess reason I hear this, an example for this would be survivors of like assault, right? Or kids who are raised in domestic violence situations. Like, why did I just freeze? Does that mean I consented to the rape because I didn't fight back? Does that mean I was okay with my dad beating me or beating my mom? And the answer is no. Your body just knew, but because we don't talk about freeze, and because we don't talk about how it is an automatic subconscious response that your body just makes in that split second to decide what is going to keep you safest, it creates this feeling of like, oh, I should have fought. Like I could have been able to fight. I should have fought, but they didn't have a choice. There's no choice in the matter. And so that's where the shame comes from, of like, I let this happen to me. I consented to this. But that's not what happened.
Thank you for bringing clarity to that, because that is so harmful. I think just even after the event to feel like this burden of like performing better, when kind of what you talked about is it's automatic. Like there isn't a way to like, it's your brain responded, and it's just how it's wired, and there's not like it was a wired better, or like I know in your article you pointed out even like you like your brain kind of maybe calculated that you probably couldn't fight off this person, and so literally in order to survive you had to freeze. And so I think pulling away that shame sounds like I mean, I really appreciate like just pointing that out, that it is automatic and it does not equal consent at all. Like
it
how
doesn't equal weakness either. Like your body chose the really brave decision to detach and to freeze as a way to try and protect you. And it was involuntary to you. And so it doesn't mean you are weak either. It means that was the best way for you to get through that situation.
Yeah. So when people are working through all this, like what kind of like final piece of advice would you give to the people who like are watching this, like, you know, they're watching this, kind of watching someone else go through it, or even the person who has experienced the trauma?
Yeah, so it's such a complicated thing, right? Like the easiest answer I want to give is compassion and grace, right? Like to be compassionate towards yourself and and show yourself grace, but it's so much easier said than done, right? Cognitively in our brains, we can understand maybe that you didn't want that to happen, but there's this emotional component, like the head and the heart complex, they're not on the same page. And so I would encourage, seek out counseling, seek out support, seek out the healing that you deserve and that you need. And if you see someone else going through it, just sit with them. Recognize that it's not a cognitive thing, right? We're not meeting them on a cognitive level. We need to meet them on an emotional level. So just sit with them. Just sit with them in their anger or their sadness. Just let them feel that, and just support them. Just remind them that you're there for them.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much for even taking the time to like dive into that, because I just feel like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. For me, I like felt it's just so emotional thinking that people are just walking around just with so much shame and anger, feeling like responsible for something that they didn't make the choice for that to happen. When it was their body's response. So I just really appreciate that and your heart to destigmatize. Even kind of what you talked about, like, it's amazing that it's taken, I mean, I feel like obviously trauma has been happening for a long time, but it's clearly just taken so much. I mean, I'm grateful we're in an age where everything is kind of mental health, trauma, all these things are getting more attention in a positive way. But it's just crazy, that's kind of still new to people to feel like, to not add on more guilt or shame into that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, well, we're transitioning to our next segment of our show, which is our trending topic. I always enjoy this part because it kind of brings light to a subject that if you're like scrolling or you're Googling, it's going to pop up, or even just hearing people talk about it more, like those buzzwords. So today we're actually talking about spiritual bypassing. And since Emily, you are the clinician, I'm going to let you take this. So what is spiritual bypassing?
Yeah, that's a really big question, actually. What is spiritual bypassing? With a really big answer, but if we can just kind of condense it, essentially, spiritual bypassing it's a defense mechanism for once. It's a way for us to sidestep or negate or ignore deep emotional or psychological wounds through spirituality and scripture. And so what's important to note about that is not just a Christian thing. This isn't something we're only seeing in the Christian church. The person who actually kind of coined the term spiritual bypassing was Buddhist. And so it happens throughout. So it's not just using like scripture or the Bible or Christianity. It's all spirituality, all religions. There seems to be this trend of using it as a way to suppress emotion or shame emotion or just avoid confronting an emotional need or a psychological wound, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, kind of like maybe not even using scripture, maybe in the way it was intended, but kind of using it to defend or what's the right word? Like justify something.
Yeah, justify or pacify something.
Okay.
Just to kind of like make it smaller than it is, or to make you feel like you shouldn't be in that space.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So why do you think this is so common in the spiritual bypassing?
Oh, again, that's a really interesting question. As I just think about it, I think there's this culture going on right now. It's like the wellness culture. Okay. We always want to be positive. We want to be happy and optimistic. And so in that, we start ignoring or suppressing what we would maybe call quote unquote negative emotions, sadness and anger. We start using like, don't be so negative. Someone gets angry, anger is a sin. So we are always striving towards like this wellness, this optimistic and positive culture. And so then we've become so uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. Right?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, we're so uncomfortable with people's anger or with people's sadness, with our own anger, with our own sadness and grief. And so we start trying to find ways to like not sit in that. We start trying to find ways to like justify or move through it quicker than we should. And so faith and spirituality is just a really good defense mechanism for that. Let me just start throwing scripture in using it as almost like weaponizing scripture to make people move through it faster than they're ready to.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I feel like as you're like explaining it, I'm like, oh, yes, I've definitely seen examples of this, experienced examples of this on my own. I'm definitely someone who is uncomfortable getting uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, especially as a mom, and I'm learning so much more. I'm so grateful. I feel like there's so many more resources, even with kids, like sitting with them in their anger and in their frustration. And it's like so much easier to be like, get it together. Like, okay, we're done. Like, we're done being angry. You know, that's, you know, how I was raised. It's like, okay, you've had your time to be angry. Like, it's actually time to move on. Like, or sad, or what, or sad or whatever. So it's like interesting, kind of how you say it's like it's sitting with someone in it. Almost reminds me of like Joe, like sitting with him in his sadness and then like letting it process. So how can someone though recognize that they're even experiencing that spiritual bypassing? Like what can bring them that self-awareness?
Yeah, what's interesting is like spiritual bypassing, it can be done to you, and a lot of it like is almost like we do it to ourselves. Like I know that I'm guilty of doing spiritual bypassing at times in my own life, right? So it's when you become uncomfortable with certain things, like you can't be in the present. Your anger is sinful is a great example, right? And it's not. Jesus was angry. You know, I don't believe that anger was a result of sin and of the fall. Like I think anger would have been there regardless. And so it's feeling detached from our emotions and our experiences. It's thinking that you always have to rise above a situation, that you have to be always the bigger person. It's using the defense mechanisms of denial and repressions and avoiding feelings of anger or sadness and fear. So if you never notice yourself doing that, if you ever notice yourself being like, oh, well, I just have to forgive and move on. It's not okay to be angry, then they're probably experiencing some kind of spiritual bypassing.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. I appreciate you just kind of like pulling that apart. So what final advice would you give to someone who like has experienced spiritual bypassing?
Yeah, so spiritual like bypassing, it can be so harmful for us. And so if you're experiencing it or you're struggling with even just like, you know, inflicting it on yourself, just like compassion, recognizing that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to need boundaries. It's okay if it takes you a process to forgive. It's okay if it takes you a while to move through your grief. It's okay if you're angry at God for your grief, for your trauma. And God just wants to sit with you in that, right? Because when we start to deny ourselves of those emotions, we're essentially cutting off a piece of ourselves.
Wow.
Denying it, which means we're actually keeping it from God as well.
Wow.
Because if we're not going to recognize it within ourselves, then we can't bring it to God.
Wow.
And so I would just encourage a person to allow yourself to feel. Feeling doesn't mean wallowing. Doesn't mean you're going to stay stuck there. It actually allows you to move through it. And so just give yourself the space to be angry if you need to be angry or be sad. Give yourself permission to set a boundary with someone and not feel like you always just have to let people like in all the time or walk all over you, or you have to rise above and be the bigger person and just tolerate harmful behavior because they're family or you're a Christian. Just give yourself space and grace and compassion. And if it's gotten to an extreme level, seek out counseling to help understand why maybe you struggle with allowing yourself to feel. You struggle with allowing yourself to take care of your own needs.
Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's one of the things I love about like MCO in particular is just the, obviously you guys are all great counselors, but even just the fact that you give people the option, you don't have to, but to bring in like their faith if they want to, because I mean, even just the two topics we talk about, like sexual trauma, like that's actually something that's great to bring to your Christian, if you're, you know, if that's a really big part of your life is your Christian faith, like bringing it to a counselor who's going to like remind you about how much God like has compassion and wants to sit with someone in their, you know, all those, again, negative, you know, quote unquote, negative feelings aren't really negative, just information, and feelings are just information. Just like, and even helping someone, it's sitting with them. It's not, I don't know, I feel like I've been just like, feel like I've seen a lot of things about like, just like that hustle in life and just really like, it's actually countercultural, maybe even more closer to Jesus to like sit and like wait in those emotions to like work through and not just feel like, like kind of like you said that, well, I'm a better person if I'm like happy and well, and that wellness and type of thing. So thanks for, just like pulling that apart, because I didn't even connect that when I was looking at that spiritual bypassing. even that aspect of like that over optimism type thing.
Yeah, like finding a silver lining in every single thing, right? Like we have to find a silver lining in our trauma. No, you don't. You don't have to find a silver lining in your trauma. Like it can just be fully sucky, and that's okay.
No, yeah, I think people need that permission though. We need that permission to feel that, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, thank you so much. So unless you have any other thoughts, we're going to move on to our Q&A. So these are questions that have been submitted by viewers. So everyone who's tuning in today, thank you so much. We appreciate your support. We're grateful for you because we create this content to help you out, and we love your feedback, and we love the questions you ask. And these questions can be personal questions that are relating to you about mental health services in general, anything. And we always make sure when we share the question is anonymously. There will not be, there's no way to trace it back to the person, but we are going to answer it to you on the video. If you want to submit any questions in the future for a future episode, go to MyCounselor.Online/ask, and we'll make sure to include those questions in a future episode. So Emily, our first question today says, my husband uses the Bible to make me feel inferior in our marriage. Do you think counseling could help him?
Yeah, that's a really big question, a really important question to ask. Kind of goes well with that spiritual bypassing topic we just addressed. But yeah, the short answer is yes. I do think counseling would be beneficial, but the long answer is more, I think counseling would be beneficial to the couple.
Okay.
Always remembering that we can't help a person who doesn't want to be helped. So forcing a person into counseling is not going to work. So if we always want to make sure the clients are willing and they're wanting to be there. But yeah, as a couple, it would be just really beneficial to come in and understand, how is this impacting the marriage? What is going on within the husband that he feels the need to use the Bible to make his wife feel bad? What is, because like we said, spiritual bypassing is a defense.
Yeah.
What are we running from? What are we avoiding? What cycles are going on within us? And so helping as a couple find out what's going on. How are you as the wife impacted as this? What does this make you feel? How is it impacting how you relate to your husband and how you view yourself? So absolutely, I think counseling would be beneficial for him, but even more so, I think counseling would be beneficial for the couple, to start healing some of those wounds that might be there now because the Bible has been used as a weapon to make you feel inferior.
Yeah, makes sense. I appreciate that. And then for our second question, it says, how do I know if I need trauma counseling?
Good question. If you're asking it, you probably do. So,
Amen.
There we go. No, but sometimes people have this idea that you have to have something like truly, truly, truly horrific happen to you. You have to have what we maybe would call like big T trauma. You have to have been beaten as a kid, or experienced sexual assaults, or you have to have had your life put on the line, seen a lot of trauma like shootings or bombings, or you have to have all these really big things to be under trauma. But the reality is that's not true, right? It can be traumatic for a kid to move around a lot. Divorce can be traumatic, either if you're going through one or you as a kid went through one with your parents. There are so many different things that actually can fall under trauma. And so if you feel like you've been through something and it's still impacting you, if you went through a breakup that was really nasty, and you're having a really hard time trusting and relating to another person, if you're having difficulty, living in the present moment and always feeling like the past is being brought up and it's haunting you and it's hard for you to engage in the present or move forward in your life, then you might need trauma counseling. It doesn't have to be this really, really big thing to bring you in, because if it impacts you, if it feels important to you, if it felt traumatic to you, then I can guarantee you any counselor wants to sit with you in that. I want to sit with you in that, and I want to help you heal from that. So if it matters to you, it matters to me, and I would say come in.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, because I feel like, I've definitely wrestled with those same thoughts, because I totally had those same thoughts. More, being more exposed to the counseling world, and even in counseling myself, I feel like obviously it makes sense more like, oh, like actually it's totally normal to go get counseling, even for something that's not super traumatic. But I totally agree. A lot of times we feel like, what is trauma? Trauma needs to be, if I don't use it, these like super intense events that not everyone goes through. And it feels like if you went through something that even if felt maybe traumatic, even if you're older, you're like, oh, that was terrible, I don't even like talking about it, it was so terrible, but doesn't fall under that category, kind of put aside as like, well, that was just a life event, I'm still like, I'm fine, I can still function for the most part. So obviously it couldn't have been that traumatic. And so I just really appreciate how you said, like, to sit, like, if you feel like it's impacting somewhat though, like it's not going to hurt to like talk about it and have someone sit with you in it. Because I kind of feel like the goal of counseling is not to like get someone, or at least for me, I feel like, or do you feel like this comes up a lot? People are afraid that if they revisit a traumatic event, they're going to get stuck in it or make it bigger than what it is. I feel like that kind of can come up sometimes.
Yeah, I definitely hear that as a fear in a lot of my clients. Like, if I go back, can I like actually make it out again? If I go back to that memory, if I go back to that experience in that place, like, will I actually end up, more traumatized, or will I end up stuck there? And so that fear makes so much sense to me, right? You already lived through it once. You don't really want to go back to it again. So the idea of trauma counseling is really hard, because it is hard. It is hard. We do have to revisit. We do have to heal. But what's beautiful is, like, with it, we get to fully close it. Because when trauma happens, and if it's unresolved, it's like an open book in our mind, like, and it just keeps coming up. It'll come up regardless. We see it pop up regardless. And when you get to do counseling, we get to close the book, file it away on the bookshelf, and it's not going to start popping up in your life over and over again and impacting you in small ways or big ways, the way you've been seeing it.
Thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. I feel it was really great. It's really great to meet you. I feel like it's so evident that your heart is to want to sit with people, to help people feel seen, no matter what has happened to them, and help them to feel like that they're still lovable and likable and like deserving of attention. For every part of their life. So thank you so much. And even just how tying in, I feel like every topic we hit today kind of tied into it all. So that was really enjoyable too, to see like, oh, like spiritual bypassing. Oh, that's that. And oh, that's the flight or fight response. Okay, like I get it now. So thank you so much for that. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, like I said, we really appreciate your feedback and helping you. Like these videos are here to help you like kind of get an idea of like what is discussed in counseling. What can I bring up in counseling? And the answer is everything. Kind of like Emily said, there's no that trauma was too tiny, we're gonna have to turn you away. Like, no, everything we want to help you with. If you have questions that you would like answered on the show, don't forget to go to MyCounselor.Online/ask. And if you aren't following us on the interwebs already, on Facebook and Instagram, you can search Love My Counselor and we will pop up. On YouTube, you can search for MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. We'll see you next week for another episode of My Counselor Live. Have a great day.